I should have never doubted my instincts. That's what I kept thinking as I stood frozen in the hallway of the Sentinel Hotel in downtown Portland, staring at the room service receipt that had just slipped under the door of room 1247. My fiancé Marcus's room. The receipt that read, breakfast for 2, eggs Benedict, 2, fresh berries, 2, champagne service. Marcus had told me he'd be alone at this cybersecurity conference. He'd told me he'd be too busy with presentations and networking events to even think about breakfast. He'd told me not to worry about calling because the schedule was absolutely brutal. But here I was, holding a bottle of his favorite bourbon and wearing the lingerie he'd bought me for our anniversary, ready to surprise him on the last night of his 4-day trip. And here was evidence that he'd ordered breakfast for 2 this morning. My name is Emma Chen, and I'm a freelance photographer specializing in corporate headshots and small business branding. I'm 32 years old, and I'd been with Marcus for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. We'd been planning our wedding for next June, a small ceremony in wine country with about 75 guests. I'd already put down deposits. I'd already bought my dress. Marcus worked as the IT director for Silverton Financial, a mid-sized investment firm in Seattle. His job paid well enough that we'd just closed on a beautiful craftsman house in Ballard, and he'd insisted I could scale back my photography work to focus on the passion projects I never had time for. He was thoughtful like that, or so I'd believed. He remembered my coffee order. He always kissed me goodbye in the mornings, and he'd seemed genuinely excited about spending our lives together. But lately, something had shifted. He'd become protective of his phone, angling it away from me when texts came through. He'd started going to the gym at odd hours, coming home at 9 or 10 at night smelling like expensive cologne I'd never bought him. And these work trips had become more frequent. Once a month, sometimes twice, always to different cities: Portland, San Francisco, Denver, Austin. It's just the nature of the job right now, he'd explained when I'd asked about the increased travel. We're implementing new security protocols across all our regional offices. I have to be on site to oversee the installations. I'd accepted it because I had no reason not to. Marcus had never given me cause to doubt him. His explanations always made sense. He was attentive when he was home, and he video called me every night when he traveled, showing me his hotel room, complaining about the terrible room service, counting down the days until he could be back with me. Except, apparently, the room service wasn't terrible. Apparently, it included champagne service for 2. I looked down the hallway toward room 1247. The hotel was quiet at 9 p.m., most guests either out for dinner or settled in for the night. Marcus had texted me 2 hours ago, heading to dinner with some security vendors. Probably won't be back until late. Love you, I'd responded with a heart emoji, then booked the last-minute flight to Portland, rented a car, and driven straight to the Sentinel. I'd planned to text him from the lobby, to call up and surprise him. But then I'd seen him in the hotel bar as I walked past, and something had stopped me from going in. He was sitting at a corner table with a woman, a beautiful woman with sleek black hair and a navy business suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They weren't touching, weren't sitting inappropriately close, but there was an intimacy to their conversation that made my stomach clench. The way she leaned in when she talked, the way he smiled at her, that soft smile I thought he reserved for me. I ducked into the gift shop before he could see me, my heart hammering against my ribs. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe she really was a security vendor. But vendors don't usually drink expensive whiskey with clients at 9 p.m. while laughing like old friends. I'd waited in the gift shop for 20 minutes, pretending to browse overpriced chocolates while watching them through the glass. Finally, they'd stood up. He'd put his hand on the small of her back as they walked toward the elevators. That's when I'd slipped out and followed them at a distance, watching the elevator numbers climb. 12th floor. I'd waited 5 minutes before taking the elevator myself. When I reached the 12th floor, the hallway was empty. But I could hear voices. His voice, coming from down the hall. Room 1247. The room number he'd texted me yesterday when I'd asked where he was staying in case of emergencies. I'd approached the door carefully, and that's when I'd seen the room service receipt slide underneath, right by my feet. Breakfast for 2. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The date was this morning, 7 a.m. So this wasn't the first time he'd had company in his room. Whatever was happening, it had been happening every morning of this trip. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds, trying to decide what to do. I could knock on the door right now. I could confront him, but something told me that wouldn't give me the whole truth. Marcus was clever. He'd have an explanation ready. The woman was a colleague who'd had a plumbing emergency in her room. They'd shared breakfast while waiting for maintenance. It would sound reasonable enough that I'd doubt myself. No. If I was going to do this, I needed to be smart about it. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the receipt. Then I walked back to the elevator and down to the lobby, where I approached the front desk with my best smile. "Hi, I'm so sorry to bother you," I said to the young man behind the counter. "I'm supposed to meet my fiancé Marcus Rivera in his room, but I forgot the number. He's checked in under his name. Could you remind me?" The desk clerk looked uncertain. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't give out room numbers for security reasons." "Of course, I understand." I pulled up a photo on my phone, one of Marcus and me at Pike Place Market, both of us grinning at the camera. "I'm his fiancé. We're getting married in June. I flew in to surprise him, but I'm terrible with numbers." He softened. "Room 1247. But if you're planning to surprise him, you might want to call first. Hotel policy requires guests to authorize visitors. I'll do that. Thank you so much." I didn't call. Instead, I went back to my rental car and drove to a 24-hour Walgreens, where I bought a notebook, a pack of pens, and a cheap prepaid phone. Then I checked into a different hotel 3 blocks away, a budget place where I paid cash and used a fake name. I needed time to think. I needed to figure out what I was dealing with before I made any moves. In my hotel room, I opened my laptop and started with the basics. I pulled up Marcus's credit card statements from our joint account, the one we used for household expenses. Nothing unusual there, just grocery stores and gas stations, and the occasional dinner out. But Marcus had his own personal credit card too, one I'd never thought to look at because we'd always been transparent about money. I logged into our bank account and navigated to his card. My hands were cold as I scrolled through the transactions. Portland Sentinel Hotel, $487 per night for 4 nights. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the other charges. Room service, yes, but also Nordstrom, $834. Tiffany & Co., $1,256. May's Fine Dining, $342. All in Portland, all in the last 3 days. Marcus didn't shop at Nordstrom. He hated jewelry stores. And May's was the kind of restaurant you took someone you were trying to impress. I went back further, checking his previous trip to San Francisco last month. Same pattern. High-end restaurants, luxury boutiques, a charge at a spa for $615. I opened a new tab and searched for Marcus's LinkedIn profile. His job title was accurate, IT Director at Silverton Financial. But when I clicked on his connections, I found her. Rebecca Liu, Project Manager at Silverton Financial. Her profile picture showed a beautiful woman with sleek black hair, the same woman from the hotel bar. They'd been connected for 2 years. There were no public posts, but her profile said she'd been at Silverton for 3 years, which meant she'd been there a year before Marcus started. Had he known her before he got the job? Or had they met after? I clicked on her name and opened Instagram in another tab, searching for Rebecca Liu Portland. Nothing under that name. But I tried variations. R, Liu, Becca Liu, and there she was. Her Instagram was private, but her profile picture matched. 2,000 followers. Following 847. Bio. PM at Silverton. Seattle World. Wine and Design. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Dinner running long. These vendors talk forever. How was your day?" I stared at the message. He was lying to my face via text while sitting in a hotel room with another woman. Or maybe he was actually at dinner now, and the woman had left. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I typed back, "Good. Just finished editing some photos. Miss you. Miss you too. Can't wait to be home tomorrow night." I set the phone down and opened my notebook. I needed to document everything systematically if I was going to understand what was happening. I started a timeline. Trip 1, Austin, 2 months ago, checked credit card, 4 nights, charges at expensive restaurants, a purchase at Saks Fifth Avenue for $976, spa services for $425. Trip 2, San Francisco 1 month ago, 5 nights, similar pattern. Nordstrom, $1,234. Restaurant charges totaling over $1,500. A charge at a hotel gift shop for $89. Trip 3, Portland, current, 4 nights, already documented. The total was staggering. In 3 trips, he'd spent over $15,000 on credit card charges that had nothing to do with work expenses. The company reimbursed him for legitimate business costs, which meant this money was coming from somewhere else. I pulled up our joint savings account. We'd been contributing equally, putting away money for the wedding and the house down payment. The balance should have been around $47,000. It was $31,000. $16,000 missing. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just an affair. This was financial betrayal on top of emotional betrayal. He'd been stealing from our future to fund his whatever this was. I needed more information. I opened a private browsing window and searched Rebecca Lou Silverton Financial. The first result was her LinkedIn profile again, but the second was something unexpected. A Seattle Met article from 6 months ago about rising stars in Seattle tech. Rebecca was featured in a group photo, identified as Rebecca Lou, 29, project manager specializing in financial technology integration at Silverton Financial. Financial technology. The same department Marcus worked with. I clicked back to Marcus's LinkedIn and looked at his connections more carefully. Most were professionals in IT security and finance, exactly what you'd expect. But there were a few that stood out. A woman named Jasmine Torres, whose profile said she was a hospitality consultant in Austin. Another woman, Michelle Park, who listed herself as an event coordinator in San Francisco. I searched for their Instagram profiles. Both were private, but both had professional-looking photos and similar follower counts to Rebecca. Around 2,000 each. A horrible thought was forming in my mind. What if Rebecca wasn't special? What if she was just one of several women in different cities? I grabbed the prepaid phone I'd bought and called the Sentinel Hotel, asking to be connected to room 1247. It rang 4 times. Then Marcus answered, slightly breathless. Hello? I hung up immediately. It was nearly 11 p.m. now. He was in his room. Was Rebecca still there? I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the scratchy hotel bed, going through every memory of the last 6 months, seeing everything differently now. The way he'd insisted on handling all our finances through his personal card, saying it was easier for taxes. The way he'd discouraged me from surprising him on previous trips, saying he'd be too busy to enjoy it. The way he'd become more generous with gifts lately, as if compensating for something. When had I become someone who needed to be managed and compensated rather than a partner who deserved the truth? By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I was going to investigate thoroughly, systematically, until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Because if I confronted him now with incomplete information, he'd just give me partial truths and strategic apologies, and I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what else I didn't know. I drove back to Seattle that morning, arriving home before noon. Marcus's flight wasn't until 6 p.m., which gave me time. I went straight to his home office, a small room he kept meticulously organized. I'd rarely gone in there, respecting his space. But respect seemed less important than truth right now. His filing cabinet was locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key, in a drawer in the kitchen. Inside the cabinet, I found his personal financial records, bank statements from an account I didn't know he had. The balance made me sit down hard in his desk chair. $7,000,000. How was that possible? His salary was $185,000 a year. Good, but not enough to accumulate that kind of money, especially not while we were supposedly saving together for our future. I looked at the transaction history. Regular deposits, always the same amount. $8,500, twice a month. Direct deposits from something called Nexus Consulting LLC. Nexus Consulting. I'd never heard Marcus mention it. I photographed every page of the statements, then returned them to exactly where I'd found them. Then I searched his desk drawers. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of old computer manuals, I found a burner phone. My hands were shaking as I powered it on. The battery was low but functional. I scrolled through the messages. There were dozens of conversations, all with women's names. Rebecca, Jasmine, Michelle. Others I didn't recognize. Sophia, Katrina, Alexis. The messages were explicit, not love messages, but transactions. Friday through Sunday, Portland, usual rate, confirmed for Austin, arrives Thursday evening, San Francisco, extended to 5 nights, full package, usual rate. These weren't affairs. These were business arrangements. Marcus was paying these women. He'd been paying them for months, maybe longer. I felt nauseous. I ran to the bathroom and actually vomited, then sat on the cold tile floor, trying to process what I'd just discovered. My fiancé, the man I'd planned to spend my life with, the man I'd trusted completely, was paying for sex in cities across the country while pretending to be on business trips. But that still didn't explain the $847,000. Even if he was spending $15,000 a trip, his salary couldn't account for that kind of accumulation. Where was the money coming from? I went back to his office and turned on his desktop computer. I knew his password because he'd never hidden it from me. Emma2024. Named after me and the year we'd started dating. The irony wasn't lost on me. His email was open. I searched for Nexus Consulting and found a folder with dozens of emails. I clicked on the most recent one. It was from someone named David Park, addressed to Marcus. Latest transfer complete. $17,000 for this cycle. As discussed, I've adjusted the allocations to cover the discrepancy. The next audit isn't for 6 months, so we have plenty of time. Audit, discrepancy, allocations. I opened another email, this one from 3 months ago. The client requests are getting more specific. I can reroute funds from the Peterson account as usual, but we need to be more careful about the paper trail. Make sure you're using the VPN for all communications. I sat back in the chair, my mind racing. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me. He was stealing from his company. The Nexus Consulting deposits weren't from a legitimate side business. They were money he was embezzling from Silverton Financial, likely with help from this David Park person. And he was using that stolen money to pay for prostitutes across the country. I felt like I was falling through space. The man I'd agreed to marry was a criminal, a cheater and a thief who'd been living a double life while I planned table arrangements and sent out save the dates. I took photos of everything. Every email, every bank statement, every text message on the burner phone. I uploaded them all to a private cloud account Marcus didn't know about, then carefully returned everything to exactly where I'd found it. By the time Marcus got home that night at 11 p.m., I was in bed pretending to be asleep. He kissed my forehead, whispered I missed you, and climbed in beside me. I lay there in the dark, listening to his breathing even out, wondering how he could sleep so peacefully while his entire life was built on lies. The next morning, I woke up before him and made coffee like always. I asked him about his trip. He told me about the boring presentations and tedious networking events. He didn't mention Rebecca Lou or breakfast for two or any of the expensive dinners I now knew he'd charged to his personal card. How was your weekend? He asked, putting cream in his coffee. Quiet. I worked on the Peterson family photos, edited about 200 shots. That's my talented fiancé. He kissed the top of my head. I'm glad you have work you love. I smiled and nodded and wanted to scream. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sarah Martinez, who came highly recommended on a forum for people suspecting their partners of infidelity. I gave her copies of everything I'd found. She was professional and efficient, never once making me feel stupid for not noticing sooner. These things are always harder to see from inside, she told me. He's good at compartmentalizing. A lot of them are. Sarah confirmed what I'd suspected. Rebecca Lou traveled to Portland regularly for project meetings that coincided with Marcus's trips. Jasmine Torres in Austin was a marketing consultant, who also seemed to travel on Marcus's schedule. Michelle Park in San Francisco worked in event planning. All legitimate professionals with day jobs, all apparently supplementing their income through arrangements with men like Marcus. But that wasn't the worst of it. Sarah also found evidence of the embezzlement scheme. Working with a forensic accountant she trusted, she traced the money trail. Marcus and David Park, the CFO at Silverton Financial, had been systematically diverting funds from client investment accounts into the fake Nexus Consulting account for over 2 years. Small amounts from each account, never enough to trigger immediate red flags, but totaling more than $2.3 million. $2.3 million stolen from Silverton's clients. Some of them were retirees, people who'd trusted the company with their life savings. I sat in Sarah's office, looking at the documentation spread across her desk, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about my broken engagement anymore. This was about people who'd been victimized by someone I'd almost married. People who deserved to know the truth. What do you want to do? Sarah asked gently. I had 2 options. I could confront Marcus privately, end the engagement, and walk away. Let him continue his life, maybe get caught eventually, or maybe not. Or I could go to the authorities, expose everything, and accept that my life was about to become extremely complicated. I thought about the elderly couple in our neighborhood who'd mentioned they had their retirement account with Silverton. I thought about Marcus's face every morning, the easy lies, the casual affection that meant nothing. I want to go to the police, I said, and I want to contact Silverton's board of directors. These people deserve to know what's been done to them. Sarah nodded. I'll help you prepare everything properly. We'll need to organize the evidence carefully for maximum impact. The next week was a blur of meetings with attorneys, with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, with Silverton's legal team. I gave them everything. Every photo, every document, every screenshot. They were shocked by the comprehensiveness of my documentation. One agent told me I'd done a better job collecting evidence than some of their trained investigators. I didn't tell Marcus any of it. I continued coming home every evening, making dinner, asking about his day, sleeping beside him while I knew that federal agents were building a case against him. It felt surreal, like living in two realities simultaneously. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal when he touched me. Every kiss felt like a lie I was complicit in, but I knew I couldn't tip him off. If he suspected I knew, he might destroy evidence or flee. The FBI had asked me to act normally for just a little longer while they finalized everything. 2 weeks after I'd found the breakfast receipt, on a Tuesday morning, federal agents knocked on our door at 6 a.m. I answered in my bathrobe, having been warned they were coming. Marcus came to the door behind me, confused and alarmed. "Marcus Rivera, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud." I watched them put handcuffs on him, watched his face cycle through, shock to confusion to panic. His eyes found mine. "Emma, I don't understand. What's happening? Did you call them?" I looked at him. This man I'd thought I knew. This stranger I'd been living with. "Yes," I said simply. "I called them." "But why? We can talk about this. Whatever you think you know." "I know everything, Marcus. The women, the money, all of it." His face went white, then red. "You went through my things? You invaded my privacy?" The audacity almost made me laugh. "You stole millions from innocent people and cheated on me for years. But I'm the one who violated trust?" They read him his rights and led him away. David Park was arrested at his office an hour later. The FBI seized records from Silverton Financial. And by that afternoon, the news was everywhere. Local Seattle news stations covered it. The Seattle Times ran a front-page story. Silverton Financial Executives arrested in $2. 3M embezzlement scheme. My phone started ringing. My parents? My friends? Marcus's mother, crying and asking me how I could do this to her son. I ignored most of the calls. I only answered when Sarah called to tell me that Silverton's legal team wanted to meet with me. The meeting was at their downtown office, a sleek glass building with views of Elliott Bay. I met with 3 people, the CEO, the head of legal, and a woman who introduced herself as the director of risk management. "Miss Chen," the CEO said, "we can't thank you enough for bringing this to our attention. The scope of the fraud was extensive. Without your evidence, we might not have discovered it for years." "I just did what felt right," I said. "We'd like to offer you something," the risk management director said. "We're creating a new position, a fraud prevention specialist who would work directly with our IT and finance teams to implement safeguards against this kind of internal theft. Given your attention to detail and your obvious integrity, we'd like to offer you the role." I stared at her. "I'm a photographer. I don't have experience in finance or IT security." "You found a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that our internal audits missed," the CEO said. "You documented it better than most forensic accountants. We can teach you the technical skills. What we need is someone who thinks like you do, someone who asks the right questions." The salary they offered was $95,000 a year, with benefits and a signing bonus, more than I'd ever made in photography, and the work would be stable, meaningful. I'd be preventing exactly the kind of crimes Marcus had committed. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course. Take a week." I took 3 days. I talked to my parents, who were supportive but worried about me taking on something so different from what I'd trained for. I talked to my best friend Melissa, who pointed out that I'd been wanting more stability in my career for years. And I talked to Sarah, who told me that sometimes the worst experiences open doors you never knew existed. On the 3rd day, I called the CEO back and accepted the position. Marcus's trial was set for 4 months later. He'd been denied bail because of flight risk, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. David Park had cut a deal, testifying against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prostitutes, when questioned by the FBI, confirmed that Marcus had been a regular client for over 3 years, always paying premium rates for extended encounters in cities where he traveled for work. Rebecca Liu, it turned out, wasn't a prostitute. She was actually his colleague and his affair partner. They'd been sleeping together for 18 months, and she'd been helping him hide the embezzlement by manipulating project budget reports. She was arrested too, charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. I didn't attend the trial. I couldn't stomach seeing him again, listening to his lawyers try to paint him as anything other than what he was. But I read the transcripts afterward. He'd pleaded guilty to all charges in a deal that gave him 12 years in federal prison. David got 8 years. Rebecca got 6. My wedding dress was still hanging in my closet. I'd never returned it. Couldn't bring myself to go back to that bridal shop and admit that everything had fallen apart. One Saturday afternoon, 3 months after the arrest, I finally took it down and donated it to a charity that provided wedding dresses to brides who couldn't afford them. Maybe someone else would have the happy ending I'd thought I was going to have. Starting at Silverton was strange. I walked past Marcus's old office every day, now occupied by a new IT director who had no idea about the scandal beyond what he'd read in the news. People whispered when I passed in the hallways at first, but eventually, the whispers faded. I became just another employee, someone good at her job, someone building a new life. The work itself was fascinating. I learned about financial systems, about the subtle ways people could manipulate data, about the red flags that indicated potential fraud. I built relationships with the IT and finance teams, implementing new protocols and checks that would make it much harder for anyone to do what Marcus had done. 6 months into the job, I was asked to present our new fraud prevention framework at a company-wide meeting. I was nervous, standing in front of 100 employees, but I made it through. After the meeting, a man approached me. He was tall, maybe late 30s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "That was an impressive presentation," he said. "I'm Daniel Ross. I'm the forensic accountant who worked on your ex-fiancé's case." "Oh," I said. "I didn't realize you worked here now." "I don't. I was consulting on the case, but I've been brought in to help with the new protocols. I wanted to introduce myself and say that what you did, exposing all of that took real courage. It didn't feel courageous. It felt necessary. The best courage usually does." We talked for 20 minutes after the meeting, and then he asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime to discuss some ideas he had for additional safeguards. I said yes, and told myself it was purely professional. But when we met for coffee 3 days later, we talked about everything except work. His divorce 2 years ago, my photography, his daughter who was starting college, my hope to travel more now that I had financial stability. The conversation felt easy, natural, like talking to someone who understood what it meant to rebuild after betrayal. "Would you want to get dinner this weekend?" he asked as we were leaving the coffee shop. And I should clarify, I'm asking as someone who'd like to get to know you better, not as a colleague. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from the possibility of being hurt again, but a larger part of me refused to let Marcus's betrayal make me afraid of connection. "I'd like that," I said. Dinner turned into regular dates. Daniel was patient with my trust issues, never pushing when I needed space, always showing up when he said he would. He was honest about his own mistakes in his marriage, about the work he'd done in therapy to understand his patterns. He treated me like an equal partner, asking my opinion, respecting my boundaries, sharing his own vulnerabilities. 8 months after Marcus's arrest, Daniel and I were sitting on his porch on Bainbridge Island, watching the sunset over Puget Sound. I'd just moved into my own apartment, a small 1-bedroom in Fremont with good light for photography. I'd started taking personal projects again, shooting portraits of women in transition, women rebuilding their lives after various kinds of loss. "I've been thinking about something," Daniel said, his arm around my shoulders. "What's that?" "About how sometimes the worst moments redirect us towards something better. If that whole situation with Marcus hadn't happened, you wouldn't be doing this work you're clearly talented at. I wouldn't have met you. You wouldn't be taking these incredible photos. Are you suggesting I should be grateful Marcus was a criminal?" I asked, half joking. "No, but maybe grateful that you were brave enough to face the truth when you found it. A lot of people would have looked away." He was right. I'd had that choice in the hotel hallway, holding that breakfast receipt. I could have convinced myself it meant nothing, could have gone home and pretended I'd never seen it. I could have married him and spent years in willful ignorance, maybe discovering the truth only after we had children, after our lives were even more entangled. Instead, I'd chosen to look clearly at what was in front of me, even though it meant destroying the future I'd planned. "I got an email from Marcus yesterday," I said. "First one since before the trial." Daniel stiffened slightly. "What did he say?" He apologized. Said he was getting therapy in prison, that he understood now how badly he'd hurt me and all the clients. He said he hoped I could forgive him someday. How do you feel about that? I thought about it for a long moment, watching the sun sink lower, painting the water gold and pink. I don't forgive him. I don't know if I ever will. But I don't hate him anymore either. I just feel nothing. He's a stranger who made choices that affected my life, but he doesn't get to define my future. That seems healthy, Daniel said quietly. I deleted the email. I don't need his apologies or his therapy updates. That's his journey to take, and I'm not part of it anymore. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and I thought about how different this felt from being with Marcus. With Marcus, there had always been an underlying anxiety, a sense that I was performing a role, being the perfect supportive fiancé while he needed me to be. With Daniel, I could just be myself, angry sometimes, sad sometimes, but always fully present and honest. Marcus was released from his job, obviously, and his professional reputation was destroyed throughout the Seattle financial sector. The newspaper articles ensured that a simple Google search of his name would always bring up the fraud case. Rebecca Liu faced similar consequences, her career in financial technology effectively over. David Park, the CFO who'd helped orchestrate everything, got the longest sentence and the harshest professional fallout. The money was recovered, mostly. The FBI seized Marcus's accounts, and Silverton was able to return most of the stolen funds to their clients. Some was lost to the expenses Marcus had already spent on his double life, but the company established a victim compensation fund to cover the shortfalls. I received letters from some of the affected clients after the case was resolved. An elderly woman who thanked me for saving what was left of her late husband's life insurance payout. A young couple who'd been saving for their daughter's college fund. A veteran who'd had his disability settlement invested with Silverton. Reading those letters, I knew I'd made the right choice in coming forward, even though it had cost me my relationship and the future I'd imagined. A year after the arrest, I was promoted to Senior Fraud Prevention Specialist. My photography had evolved too. My project photographing women in transition had turned into a gallery show at a small space in Capitol Hill. The opening night, 30 women I'd photographed stood beside their portraits, sharing their stories of rebuilding. Some had survived domestic violence. Others had lost jobs or businesses. One had lost her husband to suicide. We were all learning to live in the aftermath of destruction, finding ways to build something new from the pieces. Daniel came to the opening, and so did my parents, and Melissa with her new girlfriend, and several colleagues from Silverton. Sarah, the PI, even came, telling me she was proud of how far I'd come from that terrified woman who'd first walked into her office with a breakfast receipt. There were no photos of Marcus in the show, no references to what had happened. That story was over. These photos were about what came after, about the strength it takes to look at wreckage and decide to build something beautiful from it. Standing in that gallery, surrounded by women who'd survived their own versions of betrayal and loss, I realized something important. The breakfast receipt had been the best, worst thing that could have happened to me. It had shown me the truth early enough that I could escape. If I'd married Marcus first, if we'd had children, if I'd been even more financially dependent on him, the fallout would have been catastrophic. Instead, I discovered who he really was while I still had time to build a different life. A better one. An honest one. Daniel found me near the end of the evening, as people were starting to leave. "This is incredible," he said, gesturing at the photos. "You've created something really meaningful here." "Thank you for being here," I said. "I wouldn't miss it." He paused, then added, "I wanted to tell you something. I'm in love with you. I have been for months, and I know we said we'd take things slow, but I needed you to know." I looked at him, this good man who'd shown up consistently, who'd never lied to me, who'd supported my healing without trying to rush it. "I'm in love with you too," I said. We kissed there in the gallery, surrounded by portraits of survival and strength, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real hope, built on honesty rather than illusion. Marcus would be in prison for another 11 years. His appeal had been denied. The last I'd heard, he was working in the prison library and taking accounting classes, perhaps learning legitimate ways to work with money. I didn't follow his life closely. It didn't concern me anymore. Rebecca Liu had been released after 18 months for cooperating with prosecutors. I'd seen her LinkedIn profile recently. She'd moved to Portland and was working as a barista while trying to rebuild her career. I felt nothing about that either. Not satisfaction, not pity, just distance. My life now was full in ways I'd never imagined. Challenging work that used my skills in pattern recognition and attention to detail. Photography that felt meaningful rather than just commercially viable. A relationship with someone who valued honesty as much as I did. A small circle of friends who'd supported me through the hardest parts. Sometimes people asked me if I regretted investigating, if I wished I'd just walked away when I first suspected something was wrong. The answer was always no, because walking away would have meant living with a constant low-grade anxiety, always wondering, always suspecting, never quite trusting my own judgment. Instead, I'd looked directly at the truth, even when it was ugly, even when it meant destroying the future I'd planned. And in doing so, I'd learned something valuable. I was stronger than I'd thought. I was capable of handling difficult truths. I could rebuild from nothing and create something better than what I'd lost. The breakfast receipt was still in my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license. I kept it as a reminder, not of the betrayal, but of the moment I chose to trust my instincts. The moment I decided that truth, however painful, was always better than comfortable lies. That choice had cost me my engagement, my planned wedding, my vision of what my 30s would look like. But it had given me something more valuable. The knowledge that I could trust myself, that I could survive the worst and come out stronger, that I deserved a partner who showed up honestly, rather than one who looked perfect on the surface while rotting underneath. Standing in Daniel's kitchen one Sunday morning, making pancakes while he read the newspaper and his daughter texted me photos from her dorm room, I felt something I'd never quite felt with Marcus. Peace. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you're with and what you're building together. No secrets, no performances, just two people who'd both learned hard lessons about honesty, choosing to build something real. The breakfast receipt had changed everything, but maybe that's what truth does. It destroys illusions and forces you to see what's actually there. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to look, you find that what's actually there is an opportunity to build something authentic, something that doesn't require you to ignore your instincts or doubt yourself, or pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't. I'd never be grateful to Marcus for what he did, but I was grateful to myself for how I'd handled it, for choosing investigation over ignorance, for choosing justice over convenience, for choosing a difficult truth over a comfortable lie. That, I'd learned, was the kind of choice that defined who you really were. And I discovered I was someone who could handle the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Someone who could fall apart and put herself back together into something stronger. Someone who deserved love that didn't require her to doubt herself. The breakfast receipt was just a piece of paper, but it had shown me who I really was. And that person, it turned out, was someone I could be proud of.